Wild Turkey versus Maker's Mark, but which 101 is the one that you want? Hello and welcome back to the channel, and yes, today I'm taking a look at Wild Turkey versus Maker's Mark with their 101 tagged products. Now, Wild Turkey 101, I've covered a lot on this channel before, and it's just a pretty accessible, relatively hype bourbon. Everyone just seems to love it regardless, and it comes in at an absolutely incredible price point. We'll get onto prices a little bit later. As a result of that interest, some people speculate that Maker's Mark titled theirs 101, did it at 101 proof, because of the success of the Wild Turkey. Now, no one really knows whether that's true or whether they genuinely did believe that, well, their product was just better at that very specific 101 proof and put it out at that anyway. But hey, who knows? But today we're going to find out which 101 is indeed the one that you want. Now, as I've already said, I have talked a lot about Wild Turkey 101 on this channel in the past, and I have also reviewed the Maker's Mark 101, and I absolutely loved it. So in terms of which one I like, well, I can tell you right now, I like both of them, but I'm going to try and help you understand which one is the one to go for if you've got the choice. In the UK, at least, the choice might be quite limited. You might be pretty much only be able to get the Wild Turkey, because the Maker's Mark 101 in the UK and I believe in Europe is pretty much a traveller's exclusive, airport exclusive. It's not necessarily that much more expensive, but you got to go on holiday or go on a work trip in order to get one most of the time. It is now a shelf release in the US, or at least it was. There's a bit of uncertainty about that in some places, but anyway, it will be an interesting test. Just before we break into these, a bit about both whiskies. Both are 101 proof or 50.5%, which for me is one of my personal kind of favourite proof points. I just think it's, well, to be honest, just looks enough, but without being over the top. I do like barrel aged, don't get me wrong, but as a easy sipper without having to think about it too much, yeah, that kind of 100 proof point is about where I'm going to go. The mash bills on these two, though, are pretty different. The Wild Turkey comes in at 75% corn, 13% rye, and 12% barley. The Maker's, though, is pretty different and is effectively a wheated whiskey. It still comes in at 70% corn, but it's 16% wheat instead of any rye at all, and 14% barley. So actually what we have are two very similar mash bills in terms of percentages, but yeah, one swapped out the rye for the wheat, and that will make a massive difference. In terms of ages, the Wild Turkey used to have an age statement on it a few years ago. It used to be branded as an 8-year-old bourbon. They don't do that anymore, so we can assume it's probably not all 8-year-old, but yeah, probably hopefully not too much less. And the Maker's Mark is estimated to be around 6 years old. It's basically, it is 6 years old, but they don't absolutely guarantee it, so there might be some 5-year, 300-day kind of stuff in there, but it's about 6 years old. So again, there's argument to say they're probably pretty similar. Cost-wise, at least in the UK, the Wild Turkey 101, well, it's on offer in a few supermarkets now at £25 a bottle, absolute steal, and that can go up to about 35 when it's not on an offer at all. Meanwhile, the 101 does fluctuate a lot because it's an airport buy, so you're kind of subject to exchange rates and all that sort of stuff, but I've heard it as low as 35, and well, the bottle I paid, I think I ended up paying about 45 for it when I got mine. So look, it's definitely a big step between, at the extremes, 25 quid, 45 quid, nearly double, but then again, on the other side, actually can go for 35 quid, and this can go for 35 quid. So they're pretty similar overall. I will give you a very quick look at both bottles. The Wild Turkey, I mean, I think everyone's seen it by now if you watch this channel regularly. It is just a Wild Turkey bottle. It's slightly taller, I believe, than the stock version. The regular Wild Turkey, no one talks about that, the 80 proof. Everyone just wants the 101. Meanwhile, the Maker's Mark 101 is a distinct kind of premium version. Obviously, their regular is, well, it's not this one, basically. They've got a couple that kind of sit beneath it. The 46 arguably about the same, but it's a very glitzy, heavy bottle. This, the gold and all that wax top always makes a big difference, but you know, it just looks the business. The only bad thing is it's a screw cap. We get no cork pop on the Makers. It always annoys me. I know it probably makes no difference at all. And the wax the depth on the wax actually makes it quite difficult to pour without spilling, which is a bit of a shame, but here we are. Right then, in the glasses, there is a bit of a difference. I don't know if it will come across on camera, but the Wild Turkey's got they're similar depthy, but the Wild Turkey's maybe got a more dull, muted, kind of almost peachy tone to it, whereas that Maker's Mark 101, there's definitely got this big, rich, orange, tangerine thing going on, but they both look good. Right then, aromas first, we'll go for the 101. The 101, jeez. We'll go for the Wild Turkey 101 first, aromas. It's been a while since I've had this, and I feel like I'm gonna regret not having drank more of it. It's oaky, it's sweet, but it has got a slightly earthy, tannin-rich. It's kind of savoury, but it's more on the leathery tannin kind of level. The big brother to this, the rare breed, that is a proper leather bomb. It's got heaps of it. This though, since I've not had it for a while, really starting to show itself. But yeah, I'd say it's quite distinctly typical bourbon. It is the typical bourbon mash bill. It's got your vanilla, caramel, slightly fudgy, maybe a few chocolate hints going on, but also this kind of leathery, almost... People often refer to it as dried tobacco, I think, in whiskey reviews, that kind of note, but I'm not really getting the vegetal nature. It's much more leather, big, leather tannin thing. Right then, on to the Maker's Mark. Huge difference. Maker's Mark for me has been funny because I never sip it and go, that's a wheated whiskey, when I just have it on its own. I know it is, but never like, oh, it's definitely wheated. But side by side, softer, much more rounded, got this kind of peachy, apricot, nectarine, fleshy fruit thing, along with a load of oaky hit notes, and there's a bit honey, cherries, 101 things in there really.
If you pardon the pardon.
The grain popping off in the background. It's it's a fantastic smelling thing. I think based on pure aroma, I think the Maker's is more approachable, a bit softer, a bit more like all of the flavors go together. Think about it, it's fruit, honey, sweetness. Like, yes, there's a bit of other things in there, there's a bit of alcohol burn on it, there's a bit of the grain, but ultimately it is in that sweet and fairly safe wheelhouse. Whereas the Wild Turkey, a bit more violent, bit pokier on the nose, although this one has been open a lot longer than the Maker's has, so that has died off a little bit, but it's sweet and sharp, it's contrasting, it's definitely got more depth, but it doesn't necessarily pull me in. So pretty even, if I'm honest. It really depends what you like, and I think my preference out of these two just on aroma would vary day to day, and that will probably be quite a recurring theme throughout this video. So we'll go for the Wild Turkey first. Cheers. Look at the legs on that. Really good for a 100 proof, that absolutely stunning, as is the flavor. I mean, it is a bit hot up front, it's got some rough edges, but despite that, the fact that that can be a 25 quid bottle is astounding. In terms of individual flavors, and of course these things progress as you sip it, but just as an initial reaction, typical vanilla bourbon sweetness, little bit of extra slightly floral sweet honey kind of thing. But then the spice comes in big on this, really big. That rye hitting through. It's kind of cinnamon, pepper, unapologetic, prickly, and I actually just kind of love it. A few darkened fruit notes in there, could be cherry again. And if you let this one sit, and I do find that bottle has to be open for a while, have to have not a lot of anything else kind of disturbing your palate. And you do start to get a few of those leathery tannin notes from the aroma coming through on the taste as well. I picked them up immediately in the rare breed. In the 101, I think in my early reviews of it, probably not so much, but yeah, as it develops, there is definitely a bit of that leathery note kicking around there. And on the aftertaste, oaky, woody, bit of maple syrup perhaps with that extra sweetness in there. Still spicy, but it's dulled off a bit. It's kind of lost this cinnamon hot edge. It's a bit more peppery. Yeah. And that leather lingers. It really does. It's a great introduction to what complex, big, variable, contrasting bourbon can be without being too harsh. It's just It's not the easiest starter bourbon, but it might be one of the easiest starter bourbons that actually give you a proper expression of a big range of flavours, if that makes any sense. On to then the Maker's Mark, but first, quick water break. All right then, cheers. Soft, sweet, candy, it's chewy. That, I think I said that in the original review as well. It's got a real depth to it. The legs are decent, not quite as good, I don't think, as the Wild Turkey, but despite all that approachability and loads of sweetness and feeling like it's just a bit cakey, and yeah, it has got this slightly astringent, pulling, cleansing, kind of antiseptic kind of vibe that I often associate with Scotch whiskey. I say it about a few bourbons, to be honest, so maybe it's not just a Scotch thing, but yeah, it's a cleansing note that you don't necessarily get in a lot of more mainstream bourbon, at least. Not that Maker's Mark isn't mainstream, but you know what I mean, like the regular stuff. And you don't tend to get it so much in the higher end stuff, but there seems to be this weird bit in the middle ground where that, I don't know quite how to describe it, but it's, you know, it's iodine rubbing alcohol. It's not a strong interpretation of any of them. Iodine's definitely too strong, actually, but you know what I mean? Like, it's got this distinct, almost medical, medicinal cleaning stuff, basically, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because there's so much sweetness in there that actually I think without it, it might just be a bit too much. Other flavours, though, very similar floral honey that you got on the Wild Turkey. It's got a heap of just vanilla caramel goodness. It has got some nice strong woody notes. There is always an argument, kind of, you add the sweetness to the woody notes, you kind of end up with something a bit maple syrupy. It's not as distinct in this as it was in the Wild Turkey, but there's an argument certainly for it being there. And I've just had a thought. My first thought is I should really watch my individual reviews of bottles for what I thought I tasted before to see if it's still changing or not, because I can't remember what I said about it. But in addition, that balancing, contrasting, slightly cleansing. I need another sip of water at this point. It's starting to tug on the throat a little bit. But yeah, that antiseptic, you know, rubbing alcohol kind of thing, it's starting to get a bit of a savoury edge. And it's starting to remind me a little bit of kind of, you know, bagel tarts, marzipan. Almond is the, I guess, the answer to those two. It's not rich, it's not overt, but there is something just a little bit nutty, but also perfumey in a weird way. I don't know, almonds, I'm not really a big fan of. I don't mind it in this at all, because it does help balance that sweetness off, but I've always found them hard to describe. To me, they're kind of semi-sweet, semi-savoury, and ultimately a bit weirdly floral. And yeah, there's definitely a touch of that about it, and that comes in with a bit of alcohol burn, and as a result you end up with something that's, yeah, feels maybe a little bit not synthetic, that's the wrong word, medicinal again, basically. So now I've had both, if I come back to the turkey, I like rye. I really like rye, and I'll be honest, I really thought starting this, I actually thought, you know what, I was going to end up saying that the Maker's is the better product, but it is more expensive, and therefore they're kind of even, you don't need to worry. I think that might still be the case. Maker's feels maybe a bit more considered, definitely a few less rough edges to it, but that heat, that rye, the breadth with the leather and everything else, the turkey is just true bourbon. So if you like wheated stuff, you know you already like wheated stuff, the 101 is fantastic. I love it. To be honest, I'm kind of worried about drinking all of this and then not being able to get any more. But damn, that Wild Turkey 101 is absolutely outrageous. It is so good for the price, it's unreal. So yeah, if you can't get your hands on the Maker's Mark, don't worry too much if you weren't really sure which you prefer. But I will say, as I said in my previous video about the Maker's, it is leaps and bounds ahead of their regular entry. Like, it is fantastic, but for me right here, right now, I'm still just going to go away and take the Wild Turkey, I think, but they are significantly different, and as a result, if you can get both, because there'll be days that you prefer one and days that you prefer the other, and that really is all I've got to say about it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you will be so kind, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.